Hello, I'm Erica Mallon, Executive Director of the Aspen Institute Arts Program, and thank you for joining us for this very special panel discussion on Boys State, a truly compelling, thoughtful, and often wildly entertaining documentary. With us today are the filmmakers Amanda McBaine and Jesse Moss, as well as the incredibly dedicated and dynamic protagonists Ben Feinstein, Stephen Garza, and René Otero. They will all be in conversation with Aspen Executive Vice President, Elliot Gerson. We are so pleased to be able to bring this panel to you with our partner, Aspen Film, and in conjunction with A24 and Apple Original Films. We also want to thank the Institute's Eisner Lauder New Views documentary and dialogue series, which allows us to bring films like Boys State to further understand the process of making the film and to understanding the subject. So, why Boys State? Why, after 2 years later, that whirlwind week in Texas at Boys State, what do the filmmakers think? What do Ben, Stephen, and René think about their experience? What do they think today? And what do they think about the future? So, with those questions in mind, it is my pleasure to now turn it over to our moderator, Elliot Gerson. Elliot?
Thank you so much, Erica. And I just have to say, what an incredibly wonderful film. You know, not just entertaining, provocative, timely, important. It was really such a treat. And what an amazing treat to get a chance to talk to all of you, the artists behind it, and then three of the key protagonists. So what I'm going to do is start with the filmmakers, have a bit of a conversation, and then turn to the three Texas politicians that we all admire so much. And I may jump around a little bit, but we're going to have a chance to have all of you on the screen during the whole conversation. Let me start, Amanda and Jesse, with a question for you. Really, how you thought this could become such a compelling topic for a film. I mean, what is the source of the idea? Did you know already about Boys State? Did you know about the Texas Boys State? I know the 2017 Texas Boys State got a lot of publicity because they voted to secede from the country. So maybe that was it. But how did you get the idea?
Well, neither of us attended Boys State or Girl State, so we didn't know about it growing up. I think I first learned about the program when I saw that picture of Bill Clinton as a teenage boy in the Rose Garden shaking John F. Kennedy's hand. Bill Clinton was attending Boys Nation, which is kind of a part of Boys State. But I didn't think about it much after that until I read that article about Texas Boys State in 2017 in the Washington Post, and I thought, what an interesting program, the fact that they're bringing together kids with different political backgrounds to actually talk to each other face to face in a room. I think we love that idea, that there was a space, a rare space in American life where people are actually engaging face to face. And we were struggling to understand the political divisions in our country, this kind of political paralysis that we find ourselves in. And we thought with Boys State in Texas, potentially there was a prism to really look at that question that we as filmmakers were trying to answer. How did we get to this point? And actually, since then, we seem to have gotten to a more extreme point of polarization. So hopefully this film provides a way for us to all talk about that and find a way forward.
Well, I'm sure there will be a lot of conversations about that because of this film. And, you know, just from a filmmaking perspective and logistically, this must have been so different from anything else you've done. I mean, you filmed the whole thing in essentially a week. But, you know, one question is, as watching it, I wondered, how did you choose? How many film crews did you have? How many cameras did you have? And how did you choose which young men to follow at the beginning of the week? I mean, obviously meeting these three, it may have been perfectly obvious to you that, you know, you want to, to attach yourself to this star, but tell us how that happened.
You're absolutely right that this project was very different from anything we've ever done before. We've been working together for a long time. Most of the films we work on are very small crew, filmed over a very long period of time. And there's a certain difficulty to that length of time, but there's a certain ease to filming. This one was a completely different animal. And it was an animal. It was a little terrifying, but I think we were ready. This was not our first film. We were ready to sort of take the risk of needing to capture a story within 1 week. And, you know, fiction film will do that, but there's a certain amount of control you have in fiction that you don't have in documentary. So there was sort of a double risk of big scale, but chaos and the unknown kind of all packaged together. And I think that was something that we were just kind of ready for. But the thing, we were ready because we had the right crew and we had the right cast. And getting those two pieces put together was critical to our success, not just in having the confidence to do it, but also, you know, we needed to sort of fall in love with the people we were going to follow through this crazy experience. And finding those 4 out of 1,000 was no easy feat. So, you know, we had to spend a long period of time looking for them. But once we found them, that there was an instant kind of moment of recognition. There you are. We need you in our film, and hopefully you're game to be in our film. And so then that's what we did.
So there was a certain degree of serendipity, though, or just you had incredible insight. I mean, you could have chosen 4 or 5 people who might not have been successful electorally or not have participated as actively. So
there was a fair amount of luck for sure. But we also knew that they were very smart about politics, ambitious. We didn't know that their paths would cross or that they would find success. But in unscripted filmmaking, you depend on a fair degree of luck. And I think that's what makes it exciting, is watching that kind of happen. Of course, René, we didn't meet beforehand. We actually met Stephen, Ben, and Robert beforehand. René, we met when he gives that extraordinary speech. So the way you meet him is the way we met him, and we thought, you've got to be in this movie. How can you not be? And there were no other boys really that we were filming, and then there was a few that we were interested in and who didn't advance really beyond day 1. But it was really, we kind of bet the farm on these guys, and they are exceptional.
And, you know, one other thing I was thinking about, I don't know if I think the term is observer effect in physics. When the observation inherently changes the phenomenon, changes the experience. Were you concerned at all that by singling out these people and having a camera following them, that it actually changed the nature of the week, that perhaps it brought them more attention than might have been otherwise? Do you know what I mean by that?
Absolutely. I mean, we think about that a lot as documentary filmmakers. Of course, we can never have a kind of control experiment where there's the sort of same version of reality without the camera's presence to compare the two, to see how we did measurably affect or not affect what's happening in real life. But actually, Stephen, I think, has thought a great deal about this question, and we might turn it to him to address that.
Yeah, that actually, Stephen, tell me that, because that's one thing I was wondering, you know, how was it for someone who, I don't know how many of the 1,000 boys you already knew, probably relatively few, did the camera have an effect on how it all transpired?
Yeah, Jesse's right. I have thought a lot about that. You know, what effect does the camera have? And I think it has an effect. Whatever that is, it's very minimal. Just because I still, with a camera crew on me, I still struggled to make it on the ballot, as you see in the film. I made it on the ballot about an hour before the signatures were due. Robert had a camera on him, and he only won the runoff by 2, or went to the runoff by 2 votes. Robert had a camera on him and lost the runoff election. I had a camera on me and lost the gubernatorial election. The governor candidate, Eddie, really doesn't get a camera crew on him until after he's the nominee for governor. So I do believe it has some kind of effect of kind of getting people's attention. But with the chaos going on around that week, it really does become the background. You're not really focused on what this camera person is doing or filming or who they're filming. They're filming everything. You know, if they weren't focusing on me, they'd be going around the room, getting a bunch of shots from different angles in the room that we were in. So I don't believe that anything really would have changed that drastically had the cameras not been there.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I mean, when Eddie appeared, we really didn't know anything about him, but it didn't matter in the final analysis. the way it was all put together. So Amanda and Jesse, what was the narrative or the story that you had in mind when you began, and how did it change over the course of the week or even in the editing booth?
I mean, it's a great question. I think you start a project, you start any art project, and you have a certain set of questions that you're intrigued by, or, you know, on a very basic level, well, if they seceded in 2017, what the heck are they going to do in 2018? Or the deeper, more profound kind of explorations you want to do about, you know, how is polarization affecting this next generation, or what's the health of our democracy, or, you know, any of these big questions. But then you get there following your people, and as storytellers, we're very interested in being guided through that experience through these human beings who make moral choices, and they, you know, all that stuff sort of takes over. So I'd say that the biggest surprise for me was we didn't go there with the idea of investigating masculinity. But, you know, once you get there and you're in a room of 1,000 17-year-old boys, suddenly you have this window into.
There's a lot of testosterone in that room.
Sure. And I walked into that with a certain set of preconceived notions that, you know, I'd be seeing Lord of the Flies and it would be scary, and, you know, this and the other thing. Or my own high school self walked into that room on some level. And I think what I then, in that experience, I mean, I've talked about this a little bit before, but there was a lot of surprise to what I then saw. It's complicated, it's layered. There's, you know, there's testosterone, there's also testosterone and listening and empathy and crying. And, you know, there's a lot of emotion to that week that I was not expecting. I knew there was going to be a lot of intellectual gamesmanship, but I didn't actually realize how emotional it was going to get. And to some degree, that's because they're being pushed very hard. Their days are very long. They're sleeping 2 hours a night. You know, it's 100 degrees outside. They're marching 10 miles a day across campus. I mean, I'm speaking for all these guys. They experienced it. You watch the fatigue and the kind of instinct that they're working. That's how they're working. It's fascinating. So I wasn't expecting that.
Let me just stay with you on one thing, because I think one thing that almost everyone, you know, takes away from this is just wonderment at this all-male phenomenon, Boys State. And it's been like that, I think, forever. And you have to wonder what it would be like, how different it would be if there were girls there as well. Funnily enough, I went to Boys State in my state. I just sadly calculated it was 51 years ago. And all I remember is Girls State then was done at the same time in my state, but separately, but we had one kind of thing together. All I remember about it is meeting a very pretty girl. I don't remember anything else that happened. Maybe that's why the American Legion doesn't bring them together. But what was your reaction as a woman in this kind of environment, and what kind of questions did you ask about whether things would be different if women were there, or or politics inherently worse when it's all men? I mean, what were your thoughts?
I mean, I'm still working out those thoughts. I think that when I go spend time in Girls State, when we do make that film, whenever these projects, I mean, whenever these camps come back to life in person, I think inevitably I'll have those thoughts. I think comparing is not always where my interests lie so much. I mean, I will inevitably do that when I get into a room full of women, but I think there was certainly a certain amount of machismo that played into the electoral politics, at least of this particular election. But there was also a lot of other factors. And so I think that's not a great answer, but I'd say that those are not answers. They're still questions for me. And I'll know when I get into Girls State how different that feels. I imagine it might feel a lot the same, but who knows?
Well, one thing that struck us about the program is that, I mean, it's an old program. It's been around for a long time. Then they have 1 foot squarely planted in the 1950s, it seems like, and then 1 foot squarely planted in the 21st century. And I think it's a little bit like our country too. And the people who run the program are great, and they're really trying to reflect the diversity of Texas. They have a lot of work to do there, and whether that direction will mean ultimately integration with the sexes, which I suspect it will, they may get there. But right now it's still that kind of uneasy straddle. And in a way, that's what makes it interesting as a world to observe.
Yeah, sociologically, it's just fascinating. Just one last question before I turn over to the three politicos, and that is just the reactions to the film. And I for those who I've talked to who've seen it and looking at the reviews, it seems that people have a reaction that's a little bit dependent on their own prism on American politics. I mean, some people seem to be really encouraged and inspired, and others seem to be sort of horrified. Some find it very sobering, some find it very uplifting. Some sort of react to it cynically, bringing back all their worst thoughts about what politics are, and others come out of it just brimming with optimism that can't wait for these young men to grow up and take over because we've made such a mess of things. Do you know what I mean about these sort of polar kind of reactions?
I mean, I think it's sort of perfect that our film about polarization is polarizing. Like, there's, I do think cynicism and hope are always a dynamic in politics, or in frankly why we also love young people. So, there's a certain amount of idealism, and there's also a certain amount of hope we're going to walk into any story that stars, the people who will take over. And but I was also, there is a certain amount of cynicism already in that group about politics. And I think that's a little startling for people. My takeaway is always both. And I think that's life. But we tend to always, I find this film incredibly encouraging. I found the whole experience incredibly encouraging, like on a deep level. The idea that, well, anyway, that was my personal takeaway, but I'm very happy that there's no one takeaway for everybody, because, frankly, those are the kind of films we feel that are the most open and the least didactic and the least, you should feel this and this is what, it's not broccoli, it's entertainment, and you're going to bring your own projection to whatever story or your own personhood. And I think that's important, to have that space so people can experience their own path through this.
Well, as I said, I'm going to turn things over to the politicians here, but I'm going to ask one more question of you, Jesse. Just came to mind, as a documentary maker, you're trying, I think, to keep your own voice out of it and let the story be told. But as I recall at the beginning, you have a quote from George Washington about the danger of political parties. There must have been a reason for that quote, but you don't really develop it yourself. Do you want to tell us?
I don't. I'd really like the audience to reflect on that. I think it's actually, it's a conversation we've had around the film too, is that one choice that Boy State makes is they replicate the two-party structure of our political system. And we could debate the extent to which, and I'm sure these guys much more eloquently than us could actually talk about that, the extent to which that kind of replicates or is responsible for sort of the position we're in. And I'm not sure that's actually quite that simple. And should Boy State allow for third parties? I think that's a really interesting question too. I would put that question to them to unpack actually too. But just to follow up on what Amanda said, I think the film really is, it's a Rorschach test. And I sort of love that you can come to this movie and find an entry point sort of regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum. I think for us as filmmakers, we have politics. I think those politics and those are reflected in the choices we make, in the story and the character and the individual decisions we make every day on set. So the film's not, for me, apolitical, but I think kind of fundamentally the hopeful message, and I think there's some scary stuff in the movie too, but the hopeful message is that it's about throwing yourself into our democratic process. And that's a healthy message, I think, and a sort of hopefully a bipartisan message that you can't sit on the sidelines, that our democracy, the health of our democracy depends on your willingness to kind of throw yourself into it, to learn how it works and to play a role. And I love seeing how differently these guys are finding their roles now that they're 2 years after this process.
So let's go straight to them. That's a great segue. And we'll talk a little bit about where you are now, but let's start with where you were as high school juniors and what motivated each of you to want to go to Boys State? What had you heard, and why were you inspired to do it? And I'll just start sort of alphabetically on my screen here. Ben, what motivated you to do this?
So I was in high school. I was really big into Model UN and that whole scene. And I had a friend who went to Boys State the year before me, and he made it to the primary runoff for governor. And he came back and he couldn't stop talking about it. He says, "Ben, this is for you. You have to go." And of course I apply. And then after I have my interview and I get in, we game planned it out for like an hour, 2 hours at my house. And he told me, do this, get with these people, talk to these people, don't fall into this trap. And I was just all revved up, and it just seemed like a natural fit. And I really didn't know that much about the American Legion and necessarily what it all stood for, but I was very familiar with the electoral process and kind of the general scope of it.
Stephen, what about you?
Yeah, my two best friends had gone before me, one of them 2 years before, one of them 1 year before, and they told me the stories about it. And it, again, being involved in politics, it just seemed right up my alley. I'm very involved politically. I'm very politically conscious, but I'm not like a A student either. So to get in, it's at least in my experience, was pretty rigorous. Like, you had to have the grades, you had to have you do well in the interview, but before the Legionnaires. So I was very fortunate to get in, because they're like, your grades are iffy, but you seem like you actually love politics. And I'm like, well, I love politics, and that's why my grades are iffy, because I'm not I don't really care about math so much, going to go do some political stuff.
And René, how did you learn about it? Did you know about it when you lived in Illinois, or did you just learn about it when you got to Texas?
I was in Texas for all of high school. So, I didn't know anything about the program at all. My junior year, I was quite literally at my state's debate tournament, right? And I just made finals. I'm like hyped, revved up. My coach is like, "Hey, we want to sign you up for Boys State." And, I'm on my way to around. And I'm like, "Look, if it's a good thing, sign me up." That's all I told her. And she did. I didn't go through the same process as you saw from the film. I didn't interview, none of that. And I think primarily because I've had a history with the American Legion. Years before I even went to Boys State. I've done oratorical contests for them. I helped judge some of their tournaments, helped coach some of their kids to do these like speech competitions for them. And like in my small town of North Austin called Pflugerville, there was a lot of community leaders who were associated with the American Legion, and the work that I did with my community also helped put me, I guess, in cahoots with the organization. So, didn't know what to expect, just knew it was the American Legion, got there a week later, and no expectations means everything's a delightful surprise.
The rest is history. Let me just stay with you for a minute, and then I'll get to some personal questions with each of you. René, probably one of the most resonant lines in the film was yours commenting about how you'd never seen so many white people, or something to that effect. And first of all, just tell us logistically, Texas, I'm not a Texan, but it's a very diverse state. Why was that a sea of white faces? Is it sort of like the Electoral College in the US Senate? Is it overrepresentation of rural high schools? I mean, just explain that.
I think 100%. I like to think of it more as gerrymandering. Texas is more diverse, but Texas is not equally, densely populated. If you want to see some more, folks from low-income backgrounds that are urban rather than like low-income, rural people from backgrounds, rural folks from backgrounds, or students of color, you have to the unfortunate fact is that Texas is, kind of heavily segregated by these economic lines. They're all going to be concentrated in certain areas. So now if you have a model where you believe that to ensure true equity is just to grab 2 high school students from every high school, you're largely ignoring the fact that your model of equality is off the basis of racial geography. There's a really strong racial lines. Like Austin, for instance, where I live, is the most segregated city in the country, and like a few years ago, that was Boston. And I'm going to say this to my whole chest. Boston's the place of some pretty awful things, and for Austin to beat Boston, was pretty surprising. So I think the American Legion has a mission for equality, but they have to also recognize they do not live in an equal state, and therefore it's going to fail every time.
So there's really a structural problem there. It's not just the gender issue, but, and Stephen too, the Latino population in Texas it's everywhere, but it's concentrated in urban areas, and the Black population. And, maybe could a group of students at Boys State have come up with a proposal that be structural reform? So next year or the year after, it might be more representative of the state, or is that outside of the jurisdiction of Boys State?
You know what? I'm thinking that if we changed up the recruitment strategy to follow some maybe congressional lines, I think it'd be it's not perfect because gerrymandering is never perfect, but I think we'll get a little closer.
So back to you, Ben. You were introduced today, as you introduced yourself in the movie, as a political junkie, and did that also lead you to want to play the sort of the managing role? I mean, it's the process of politics that's so fascinating to you that pushed you in the direction that you took?
To a degree. Honestly, it was more, and you see it, the first night winds up, and how Boys State works is you kind of need your signatures for governor. So, you need to get a lot of them first night. And I really did not understand the timetable on how to get that. So you see me kind of contesting other candidates and trying to stand my ground, but it was really me covering up for a lot of insecurity. The fact that everyone was moving and I was the last to the punch. And it wasn't so much a fascination with politics, more so that it was just like I wanted to do something important. And I knew state party chairs were influential, and I knew, I can probably do the job. And instead of making speeches all week and trying to play catch up, I can, be the first to the punch and really I'll be active all week. And it's not just an electoral crowd pleasing role. You have to do stuff. And it seemed really appealing to me tactically, but definitely the opportunity to bring in a lot of political influences and ideas and campaign strategies really fit kind of what I've been doing in high school. And
it's fascinating. And I mean, you knew enough about political campaigns to know, for example, that negative campaigning works. Does that give you any moral concern, or is that the importance that, this is the nature of politics, it always will be, and what's important is to win, and as long as you don't cross a certain line, whatever works?
I think that's the biggest thing I've been reflecting on since the film has come out. And it's the biggest blessing of the film to me is the chance to, take certain actions when you're 17, and then a year or two goes by and you get it out of your head and the passion isn't there anymore. And then you look at yourself in a mirror, unfiltered. And when I first saw the film, I saw a rough cut in August of last year. And I never met Stephen there really. I knew René, but that was a very poisonous relationship. It wasn't like a friendship. And I didn't, I knew Robert from before, but I didn't really get the chance to reconnect with him substantially there. And I saw these people as obstacles and not as people. So when I saw this rough cut, I was very much expecting the Ben Feinstein victory reel. And that's not what I got. I had to, I had to look at these people as actual people and see these people are wonderful, talented, super smart. And I saw my actions had consequences, and I saw things were not as simple as I thought they were, right? And when I originally saw the film, I'm like, wow, there was so much left out. I really thought I did better. But then as I kind of reflected on it more, I'm like, this is kind of right. And the fact that I have this reaction, I shouldn't be defensive. I should be probing about it. I should look inward and see, why am I not comfortable with it? And I feel like politics have always kind of been adversarial, but we have reached a point in American politics where this adversarial nature, this insistence on having the moral high ground, and that in a lot of ways, our politics and our morality have blended together. And I see a lot of trends in American politics today that I embodied at Texas Boys State. And, when Stephen's gun control issue came out, my first instinct was, let's smear him on it. And that wasn't me trying to be mean. It wasn't me trying to actively shoot him down and thinking I was going too far. It was like, that's what all the adults are doing. So of course we're going to do that. And it just seemed natural. I never really had any like moral issues with it. And I feel like we've reached a point in our politicking where negative campaigning and smearing and false information and skewed narratives have replaced an objective basis of fact and an objective respect for the person across from you. And, you know, it's like in the 1950s when the Red Scare happened and McCarthy went after the army, the general stood up and said, "Have you no decency?" and it stopped. And I feel like if that happened today, it would not at all be the same response. And that's a sign that we've really denigrated our politics in a lot of ways. And I embodied that. And Boys State was a wonderful opportunity to reflect on it and say, you know, just because that's how it's been isn't how it should be. And we have a wider system and a wider democracy to defend that these values are not compatible with.
Well, that was quite an eloquent statement. I think if more people heard that, I think more people would react to this clearly on the optimistic side of the spectrum. And Stephen, I mean, it's a natural time to ask you, how did you feel about, you know, that kind of a campaign and its, you know, effect on your own chances? You seem to be, frankly, you know, I mean, I vaguely remember myself at 17. I'm not sure we really had I and my friends really had firm convictions. You know, politics was about power, and we probably took the politics of our parents. But you seem to be already exceptionally committed to ideas, the ideas of politics, the ideas of policy. You participated in marches. What was it like for you, for whom politics is about making a better society as opposed to just winning, to be in that environment? And how did you react to what you saw?
Yeah, so I saw it as, well, here is the thing that I've been campaigning against is happening to me. So I can use that as saying, like, you see, this is what I'm talking about. And I'm not going to, you know, at the time I said go down to that level of mudslinging. I was going to defend my position, and then, you know, push forward. At the time, it was very disheartening at times. It's not really caught in the film, and I've only very recently touched upon it. But a lot of my party, even though I did win the runoff against Robert by like 70% of the vote, a lot of my party the next day didn't believe in me at all, that I had any chance in hell to win the gubernatorial race. You know, they had heard that Eddie was such a amazing debater and that, oh, he's a, you know, liberal gun taker and he has no chance. So my own party was kind of abandoning me and kind of like, let's rally around the lieutenant governor nominee and have him be the top of the ticket, because Stephen Garza isn't gonna, you know, have a chance. And so you see a lot of the shots. We're all very angry. We're all very mad. You see us walking with these faces, we're just so angry. I'm seeing, you know, I'm being attacked. Words are being put in my mouth. There are memes being made about me. So I was really just a man on a mission. Like, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to, you know, you throw something at me, I'm going to turn it around, throw it back at you, without going down to that level. So it was very, it was disheartening. It was also kind of glad that it happened, because now it's like, okay, well, now I've been talking about these things. I've been talking about, you know, higher calling and stepping away from those nasty politics or the politics of mudslinging and negative attack ads and all those things. Now that it's happening to me, it's like, okay, this is my chance to actually fight that back instead of just talking about it, that, hey, we need to do this and step away from this. So it was very, at the time, I was very upset about it. Upon reflection, I'm really glad it went down the way it did. It gave me a chance to kind of talk to different people and kind of build a coalition of people who didn't necessarily agree with my political views, but truly believe that I had their best interests at heart, and that if elected would work with them to come to an amicable compromise that would have all parties walking away feeling satisfied.
René, let's just stay on that theme for a minute. I mean, it's quite apparent that you have very progressive views. and you're in an environment that you sensed was not particularly progressive. But you didn't abandon your views, but you knew you needed to moderate some of them, perhaps, to obtain power and obtain influence. Do you just want to talk to us about how you weighed those things, how you weighed your convictions against the desire, the need to actually be elected to office to affect those things? So sometimes requiring a degree of compromise.
Of course. I'm going to go back to what you're talking about, observer theory. I came into this space, I was in line. My mom kept reminding me, she's like, don't look like there's a lot of, people around, black people that look like you around here. I'm like, yes, Mom, I know. There's like 3 black people. And so she's like, let me know if you want to come home, this, that, and the other. I was so psyched out. And so then I came in with the intention, like, look, yo, if I'm going to survive the week, I got to cater to their games, or just decide to be the outcast. And how I was just weighing on those options. Day 2 rolls around. I decided I was going to run for the state party chair because, I was writing my speech as other people were speaking. I was decided when other people were going up there that I was going to run for state party chair because, primarily, I was a little defeated. I lost my position in the Senate, and that's what I wanted to do. And so, while having the video cameras on me now, I recognize that I have the responsibility to be genuine, because this is the immortalized form of me. So I will say, as poetic as it would have seemed that I came in there with the intention of, being me, that's not entirely the truth. There wasn't any cameras. I generally think Boys State would have gone a different way for me. Now, in terms of moderating my views, once I got to the position, right, I was like, ooh, liberal in sheep's clothing. You know what I'm saying? I made it to the top. I started having meetings with my platform committee to figure out what the platform of the party was going to be. And I will say this, that based off of the demographics of Boys State, both political parties are going to end up having the same platform. And so they were arguing, pushing back with me, just didn't want to give me the respect as their leader. And so I was like, man, I really have to switch up. It's not my responsibility with the position that I'm in to make this a one-man show, but rather to represent, a larger interest. And I think that's what the camp experience showed me. Even if I don't believe it, the lesson at the end of it all is that, politics is not a one-man show. And that was the main lesson, So I had to moderate because it wasn't just me.
So, as Jesse mentioned at the beginning, this was filmed, 2018. The partisanship, the division and rancor in the country has only increased since then. I mean, I think many people watching this film would love to hear from you about how, whether you're confident that as your generation rises into positions of influence, that you're going to be able to somehow fix this very, disheartening and dysfunctional mess we all find ourselves in. Are you after this experience and the film and what you're doing now? And I'll end with a question about what each of you are doing now. Are you optimistic that we're going to get out of this rut that the country is now in, Ben?
Honestly, I can't say yes or no. I feel like the problems we're seeing crop up now are the product of 50, 60 years of attacking economic support structures, defunding education, losing government credibility, encouraging or not preventing the spread of blatantly false information, foreign interference in our information process. I don't know. I mean, and I don't have time to go into what I think is really wrong, but I think it runs a lot deeper than just police brutality and coronavirus. These are symptoms, not the problem themselves. And I feel like a lot of politics and government is business as usual. And I feel like we get pessimistic about everything, when in reality, you still have lights, you still have running water, you still have a bureaucracy that hasn't fallen apart yet. And there's a lot of internalized processes in the US that go on and they work, and we don't acknowledge that they work because we only focus on the bad. But there are also very significant problems on a lot of different levels and a lot of bad political trends that have been going on. I don't know if our generation can fix it. I genuinely just like don't have a good answer for it, because I feel like we bring a lot of optimism to the table, but at the same time, I feel like every youthful generation brings optimism to the table. And there are certain obstacles that our generation faces that other generations haven't. And I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
Maybe, you know, the way this pandemic has affected us, it's sort of brought to the surface what is so rotten in our society from whatever perspective one has. Maybe there will be greater change. But Stephen, what do you think? What do you say about the situation we are in politically? You spoke to the Texas, not the Nationalist or the Federalist Party convention, the actual Democratic convention. So you obviously have interest in these things. Do you think things are going to improve?
I do believe, because if I don't believe that they will, then what is even the point if you don't believe, you don't have faith in your generation's able to do things. If you throw it away, then it's thrown away. If you defeat yourself in your mind, you're never going to make it. You're never going to accomplish the things that you want to see accomplished. Yeah, and Ben is right on. Every generation does have that optimism. You see that people our age 50, 60 years ago were marching for civil rights, and look what's happening 50, 60 years later. And while there's been a tremendous amount of improvement since then, I'm sure that if you would have told them the state of affairs the country was still in 60 years after their activism as teenagers and young adults, they'd be shocked that not enough has been done. And that the issues that they're plaguing them, you see the violence on the streets. And you compare it, if you just took a picture of today and put it in black and white, would you say that's the 1960s? You have the more Nixonian kind of presidential politics going on right now with the current administration, but so there's so much to feel like it's lost. It wasn't lost in any particular moment, that it was lost over a long period of time. But I genuinely do feel that my generation getting involved in these protests, getting involved, having the access of information and the access of the internet, and having their entire world in the palm of their hands, and becoming educated and reaching out to more people and having them get involved, and more people, young people having an interest in politics and in getting involved in some shape or form. Definitely, I think for the long-term health of our nation is a good thing. And so I'm very optimistic. I'm very hopeful. We're gonna see what role the young people play in this 2020 election in November, and then we will be able to assess things more and say, hey, they're an important block, and they're motivated, they're eager to, a lot of them feel that government has abandoned them, that there's no faith in politicians, they can't afford to go to school, they can't afford to buy a home, they can't afford to do any of these things because of the system that's in place, and so they're getting involved to directly change their circumstances. So I'm very optimistic about what Generation Z, as they call us, is going to do in the future.
Well, I hope you're right. I couldn't help but thinking back to when I was at Boys State, and it was in 1969, which is, right after all of the civil rights protests and Vietnam. And I think my generation did feel, as you said, and as Ben, you said, we felt that we were going to be changing the world. Well, we look back and we didn't nearly the way we all hoped we would. But maybe things are really different now, and that you're going to be making that big difference. René, what message do you have of realism or optimism as we're at this unique time in American political history?
I think this unique time has honestly been a point of optimism for me. I do think a lot of folks are a little anxious about the climate, a little anxious about the things that are going on. But I will say this is the status quo, and this has been the status quo for a long time. Lots of folks have been abused and publicly executed by police before this. We had the Watts riots, LA riots, Rodney King. We also had Ferguson. This is not new. This is just the resurfacing of the condition that some people in this country live in, being brought to surface, and it's making folks uncomfortable. So that being said, I do think it's absolutely possible for Gen Z to continue and change the the world per se, because just as Ben was saying, every youth does come with its hope. Comes with its hope. Every generation comes with its hope, but this generation comes with technology. It comes with the ability to understand somebody else's life in a way where you don't have to live it. It comes with that basic empathy for us to genuinely want to create change. So I'm going to say this: it's not Gen Z's responsibility either. I do believe that with this motivation, it needs to be tempered. I want to be an activist. I want to be an educator, and I want to do nonprofit work, because I believe in tempering this motivation with the education necessary, and just, even pondering solutions. Because right now, I will say there's a lot of angry people protesting, but they don't even know what the solution looks like. That's when we can truly start seeing change. So it's the responsibility of the older generations to, situate themselves in a position to give these resources to us younger folks, give us these platforms, give us, the nonprofit research, education, give us all of these things if you also want to see America change, because it shouldn't just be us. And just in closing, I'll also add that, for my personal solution of it all, I think it's easily possible if we just abolish the American binary, remove the Republican and Democratic, labels, because there should be no reason why the people in this country are identifying with these political parties as if they're personality traits, because, you're either one or the other. We get rid of the binary, we introduce multiple party systems, and create an intergenerational alliance, then yes, we will
Well,
change the world.
Jesse, there's the George Washington quote to close things out, just as you would have intended, and you didn't even have to develop it yourself. So I could go on for hours. You're all remarkable, two very gifted filmmakers, three extraordinary gifted, and I hope very ambitious young men. We'll look forward to seeing some young women. Thank you, Amanda, for going to Girls State. And with that, I'm going to turn things back to Erica. And thank you very much, Erica, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Elliot, for that incredible conversation. Thank you, Amanda and Jesse, for letting us in on your process. And thank you so much, Ben, Stephen, and René, for your bravery and your honesty and sharing your thoughts about Boys State, as well as what do you think about today and what do you think about our future. And for all of you watching, again, thank you for joining us.